Last year, Hyundai and Kia both introduced vehicles that ride on the same platform and are more or less siblings, the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6. Now, of course, if you've been paying attention to the Hyundai and Kia lineup, you'll know that there's a third brand in the mix there that's also Korean, that's also part of that bigger group, Genesis, and they, of course, were not going to be left out with these new vehicles. The EV6 and the Ioniq 5 have been met with really, really good accolades and reviews, so Genesis wanted in on that, and of course, that was always part of the plan. This is Out Motorsports, my name is Jake, and this is the 2023 Genesis GV60. Let's talk all about what this GV60 is, talk about where it fits with those other two vehicles, talk all about the interior, the tech, the power, and then of course we'll get it on the road and talk about how it is to drive. Okay, so what is the 2023 Genesis GV60? Well, like I said, it's on that eGMP platform that is shared with the Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6, but in this case, every GV60 is going to be a dual motor vehicle, which gives you all-wheel drive, and they're going to be a little more performance-oriented than anything else except that EV6 GT that comes from Kia. So in this case, we have a GV60 Performance here that is 429 horsepower and 516 pound-feet of torque. That in itself is very, very quick. And of course, there's a little party trick up its sleeve, as is the case with a lot of EVs these days. There's a boost button on the steering wheel that will give you an extra burst of horsepower for 10 seconds at a time for a total of 483. Now, riding on that eGMP platform means this is an 800-volt architecture, which is good for very fast charging speeds. These cannot quite do a full 350 kilowatts, but that is where you're going to get the fastest charging times from a fast charger if you're out on the road. This particular GV60 has a 77.4 kilowatt-hour battery, which is good for 235 miles of range. Whether you think that's good enough for what you're doing with your driving or not, that's up to you. You need to really think about that. This one is the Performance. Like I said, it's the higher of the two trims. It's the faster of the two trims. If you get the Advanced trim, which is the slightly slower model, it's still going to be plenty quick. You get a little more range, but it's really only 10 or 12 miles. It's not going to be a huge difference. Now, when it comes to charging, Genesis claims that this car can do 10% to 80% in just 18 minutes, which is what we need to see with EVs if you're going to be road tripping them. Having that fast charging speed on the road goes a really, really long way. Of course, if you're charging at home overnight, you can just charge at a slower speed in your garage or in your driveway. Not as big of a deal. Now, as far as what else is different with this vehicle versus the EV6 and the Ioniq 5, the biggest difference is going to be the suspension. Genesis has a slightly different suspension going on that is, of course, adaptive, where the shocks can get softer or stiffer based on the driving conditions. However, this car actually has a camera-based system that reads the road ahead of you and tries to preemptively adjust the shocks regardless of your drive mode to keep a very consistent ride. That is something that we've seen with some other brands. Lincoln in particular uses it in the Aviator and the Navigator. It works really, really well, and it's nice to have it here also with Genesis. Now, I would be a little remiss if I didn't talk about this car's styling, because as you can see, this is kind of blobby. And I don't normally talk about styling too much, but I gotta say, this doesn't feel very Genesis-ish to me. Genesis has some other EVs. They've got the electrified G80, which is a very, very beautiful electric G80 sedan that looks just like their gas-powered counterpart. They've also got the electrified GV70 crossover that was just announced that, again, looks just like the GV70 gas-powered SUV. Genesis has been making really, really beautiful cars that are just stunning designs. And while I do think that the Genesis designers, as well as sibling companies Kia and Hyundai, have been allowed to go really wild with their styling in a great way, this, to me, doesn't scream Genesis at all. This looks a little bit to me like they were given this platform and said, here's the hard points, here's the size, you gotta do something with it. And it just, this isn't landing for me. The only part about it that feels very Genesis-ish to me on the outside is these wheels. These are a 21-inch wheel. I think they are fabulous. I love them. But the rest of the styling, it doesn't really do it. It's interesting, but it's not Genesis. So enough about my personal taste in styling, because frankly, if you like this design, you're gonna buy it. If you hate it, you're not. But let's talk a little bit about what's going on at the front, at the rear, and inside, because all three of those are worth talking about. So first of all, let's start by opening the frunk. Genesis does indeed have a little bit of a frunk going on under the hood, and it's not huge. That's another characteristic shared with the Hyundai and Kia siblings, and I think they're doing it this way because they want to keep everything packaged up here for the sake of more interior height in the cargo area. But in any case, you've got a lot of just basic componentry as far as, you know, some different electric stuff, and then, you know, your washer fluid, your coolant, that sort of stuff. This right here is going to be your storage area in the Frunk. This opens up. It seems to be fairly well sealed as far as weatherproofing, weather stripping and all that. This is really tiny. You can fit like the charging cord in here that they give you for like your travel charging if you need to bring that, or you could fit something really, really small, a couple iPads. But this is really not huge, but this is all you've got here. So let's take a look in the back and see what's what back there. And let's pop the hatch. Before we do, I wanted to mention this spoiler going on back here, because this is, of course, for aerodynamics. It will help with both range and performance if you're going at higher speeds. However, this guy blocks some of your view out the back of the car. It bisects your back window. You've got all of the glass up here, and you do have a little bit right here. This is kind of like some Priuses and some older Honda hybrids that got this sort of styling. And yes, you do notice it in your rearview mirror. But in any case, if we pop this hatch open, you'll notice it's a fairly large opening. You just have to keep in mind that the slope here is fairly aggressive. So if you're trying to put some big box in here, this is not a hatchback like, you know, a Volkswagen GTI that's a very squared off design. You do have to watch just for that slope. You do have a decent amount of cargo space here, and then your back seats do fold to make a flat floor, so you can load things that are a little bit longer in there. Now, unfortunately, you do have this floor for the cargo area, but it doesn't lower to give you a ton of space, you know, to get a taller overall height. They just have some secret storage going on under here that, in this case, Genesis is using for things like a tire mobility kit, the owner's manuals, those sorts of things. They've got the travel charger. This is the most interesting thing that's back here. And this is not exclusive to the Genesis GV60. This is also offered on the Kia EV6 and the Hyundai Ioniq 5, but it's worth talking about because this is the first time I've gotten to play with this. This is the vehicle to load adapter. And this is a really cool thing that a lot of electric cars either can do or will be able to do, in that it lets you plug in this adapter to the charging port of the vehicle. And then on this side, you can see that it's kind of a whole bunch of nothing until you pop this cover open. And it gives you a regular household outlet. So what that means is you can power anything that would run off of this 110, 120 volt outlet. And we've seen this used in demos where they've powered an entire DJ setup, for example, something that draws a lot more power than you might normally think to use a car for. So pretty neat that this is included, and this is really easy to use. Let's go ahead and check out how that works. So the first thing you have to do is turn on the EV charge transfer, which is just found on the main infotainment screen here. You just push this V2L, and it will let you set where you're gonna have the charge stop. So basically you cannot discharge the car too far. In this case, we're just doing it for a demo, but you can say, okay, at 20%, stop vehicle to load so that I've got enough range to get out of here and get to a charger, that sort of thing. So just have to check on that, and then we'll plug this guy in. Now that we've got this all set up, all I have to do is open the charging door. I've got this all ready to go, and I have chosen to plug something in already just to make this easy on myself. Plug this guy in. There's a button right here on the end. I will push. There's a little green light that comes on, and then, hey, do your hair wherever you are. So that is kind of a neat, feature that this car has. Again, it's not exclusive to the GV60, but I really like that they even offer it. And like I said, I've seen this being demoed to run something like a DJ system. Oops, I have to push this, don't I? Well, this is fun. It had locked. That's okay. So anyway, after I figured out how to get this thing unplugged, I have to unlock the car. This is really, really cool. I like the fact that it's offered, even though this is not a Genesis exclusive thing. It's still nice that they have it. So with that, let's show you the interior, because again, there's a lot to talk about in here, and then we'll talk about how this whole thing drives. Okay, so let's talk about the interior of the GV60, but before we do, we're gonna start with the key. This is the key to the car. It's a really pretty key. It's got this kind of diamond design going on, and you're not gonna have to use it very much because Genesis has offered some interesting stuff here. So you can use your phone as a key, of course, but they've also got facial recognition and biometrics to both get you in the car and get it started. Now, I was unable to set this all up because you have to have both car keys, not one, and they only gave me one key. So I can just kind of talk you through what this all is. So if you don't want to use the key, that's fine. There are a bunch of buttons. They're all on the sides, and they can be a little tough to use if you don't know where they all are because, of course, there's 4 buttons per side, and they all feel the same in the dark or in the rain or whatever. But when you get up to the car, you'll notice there is this little square right here. This is on the back door's pillar, and this will actually recognize your face. You just have to stare at it, and after you've got it all set up, it will just read your face and it will unlock the doors. And you know that the doors are unlocked because the handles have popped out. So when you open the door, then you are inside the GV60. Now, this interior in particular is fabulous because it is blue. The whole thing is navy blue, and you've got some lime green accents everywhere, which also are very, very cool. They kind of match the pollen everywhere in the DC area, which is not very cool. But in any case, hopping inside the GV60, you'll see there's a whole lot going on in here that is also all blue. They offer other interior colors, but this is just so fabulous that you have to go with it. They've got some really nice textures going on with kind of this fake metal plasticky trim on the dash, and then both a leather or fake leather on the tops of the doors, kind of a suede thing going on the insets of the door panels, and then more metal and plastic going on here. So really, really cool design. I really love the interior as much as I don't love the exterior. This is very, very fun. Now, looking further over, the other part of starting the car is biometrics, and what that means is fingerprint recognition. So this is where you would put your finger, and that would start the car if it was all set up. Now, like I said, I didn't set this up because I can't, but this is where you put your finger and it would just start it all up. Now, moving further back, this is the other thing that's been really excitedly discussed, and it is the orb. This is the shifter for the GV60, and it's not much of a shifter. It's a big ball that glows. So how do you shift the car into whatever gear you want? Well, when you put your foot on the brake and turn the car on, this whole thing spins around. Now that is super, super cool. I think it's a fun little touch. It's very cheeky. There's a lot of personality here. My question though is, how long is this thing designed to rotate back and forth, and what happens if it fails to rotate open and you can't shift? I'm sure they figured this out. I'm sure that the motor is very robust, but I just always think of the potential failure points on top of the cool factor. So I love this. It's very, very neat, but I'm also just kind of curious about what happens otherwise. Anyway, looking back down here, you'll notice that this has a little bit of a green tinge to it. There's ambient lighting all over the car. This is also where there's ambient lighting, and you can choose the color that this has going on. So this is green, but you can pick whatever you want. Looking further up, this is the standard controller for the Genesis infotainment system. This is great. It's a rotary dial, kind of like BMW iDrive, and then you can also draw on it if you need to draw some letters. But this is also all a touch screen here. So you've got your main screen here for infotainment, and then you've got your gauge cluster screen over here. We'll come back to this guy in a second, but this is your infotainment screen. It'll show you all your EV info, which is, of course, nice and necessary. You can set all your different charging settings and departure times if you want to precondition the car, that sort of thing. That's really nice. There is a built-in map and navigation, of course, but if you don't want to use that, there is also Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. They are both hardwired, not wireless. I'm okay with that because I like good sound quality, and you don't get the best sound quality from using wireless CarPlay or Android Auto. Plugging it in is the best thing. And you would think that best sound quality is a requirement because this thing has Bang & Olufsen sound, which is really a pretty good system. It's not my favorite system that I've heard in a premium brand, but it's also not bad. It's totally good for what you think it's going to be. It's not on the caliber of Mercedes-Benz Burmester. That's kind of where I put a lot of things, is way up there. My issue is that other Genesis vehicles have better sound systems. So this one's just not quite where I want it, but it is very good. Now, looking back at the screen and the rest of what you have here on the center stack, there are a lot of physical buttons and controls, which I love. So you've got dual zone climate control, you've got some hard buttons for some key controls with your climate while you're driving. You can just hit them easily without taking your eyes off the road. And then this guy is indeed a touch screen, so you can change where the air moves and all that by just touching here. So that is all fine and good. And then you've got some controls for your media system and infotainment all down here. Again, nice hard buttons. Looking over here, you've got your other controls for volume and tuning, and some more controls for your infotainment. Again, nice hard buttons everywhere. I love that. Further back, you've got heated and ventilated seats, a heated steering wheel, your brake hold, parking cameras, parking sensors. That is all great as well. And then a Qi wireless charging mat right here that you can see a little bit more of when I pop open the center armrest bin. So that's all great. Moving up to this screen here, this is configurable in a whole bunch of different ways. I like how I've got it right now. You can have a couple other dials and things if you want, but it's nice to just see everything going on here. It's easy to read. They use the pixels well. A lot of brands will put a screen here for no real reason and not use it as well as they could. So I like what Genesis has got going on. Looking at the steering wheel, this is a 2-spoke wheel. It's kind of funky, but it fits with the funky layout, which again, funky is neat. I like funky. I just don't know if funky is Genesis's brand. But either way, here we are. So let's look at the steering wheel. So you've got a bunch of controls here. This is all for highway driving assist over here. This is all more for media and telephone. This is interesting. This is very similar to Mercedes-Benz, how they use swipe controls to control your tracks if you're playing music, want to change songs, or if you want to mess with some of what's going on up here in the gauge cluster. So you can push and hold and it will hide that or it will bring it back. And you can change all sorts of things that you want to see here. So this is all kind of interesting, but what that means is there's no hard buttons to change songs, which I find myself doing a lot more than adjusting all of this stuff. So not my favorite layout or setup here, but kind of is what it is. Now looking further down, these are two important buttons. You've got your regular drive mode button, which will just cycle through a few different things between Eco, Comfort, and Sport. And that just kind of changes, like I said, your throttle response, your adaptive suspension, those sorts of things, steering weight a little bit. But the more important one, which you can push when you're in any of these drive modes, is Boost. And Boost, like I said, will crank up your power output for a total of 483 horsepower for about 10 seconds at a time. So we'll talk about this more when I start driving. But otherwise, looking in this interior, it's nice, it's spacious, it's very comfortable. You've got decent headroom back here if you're tall, just given the shape of the vehicle. You do have this beautiful big sunroof that has a shade, but it does not open. It's just a big piece of glass. But easy to have room for a lot of people in here. That is certainly a nice thing. So with all that, let's go ahead and get the camera reset up. We'll get behind the wheel and talk about how this GV60 performance is to drive. Okay, so let's talk about driving the 2023 Genesis GV60 Performance. So starting off here, just in comfort mode, in a neighborhood, this is all actually very nice and comfortable, which you would hope it would be given the whole car's purpose and that really fancy suspension. But everything's really nice. The suspension, the ride quality is very, very good. I'm actually gonna aim right at a pothole. It does a really nice job just soaking up those bumps. Again, that's from that road previewing suspension, and then just the fact that it's adaptive in general, plus nice shock damping, good spring rates, all that. So around town, it feels really good. You don't necessarily feel the weight of this car. Every EV is heavy right now, and you don't necessarily feel it, which is nice. At higher speeds, you do feel a little bit of kind of just the way that it compresses the weight as you hit bumps. You still do feel that even with that road preview suspension, even in sport mode where everything is stiffened up. You feel it a little bit more, but generally the ride quality is very, very good. I would say that's probably the highlight of the whole car for me, is just the ride is so, so good. Now, leaving a stoplight, applying power, this does have a lot of power and torque. It doesn't feel super jumpy. It's easy to keep it just really collected and calm, which is something you want when you're just kind of cruising like I am right now. If you roll onto the power a little bit more, of course it is quick, it's properly quick, but it's not gonna be a throw you back in your seat experience every single time, which is honestly something I'm very okay with because we don't need that every time. Now, if you change your drive mode and put this into sport, it immediately amps up the throttle response as you would expect. It adds weight to the steering, which you would expect, but again, it doesn't make the car so jumpy that it's irritating necessarily. We'll get into more of this on the highway here in just a second, but the whole thing is nice and balanced, and then that boost button, of course, adds more power even still. Now, otherwise, as we're going toward the highway, this is a nice, quiet vehicle in general. This particular car is sort of high mileage for a press loan that we would get. It's got 8,700 miles on it. There are some rattles going on, but these are early production cars, so I try not to judge that too harshly. But again, even in sport mode, hitting some bumps, it rides really nice. Now in the city here, trying to just deal with stop and go, you've got these paddles on the steering wheel that will change how much regenerative braking you get. I'm at the maximum level 3, and then if I hit the plus paddle, which is on the left side for some reason, they will up the recuperation to the I pedal, which is the full one pedal driving scenario where it can recuperate and bring you to a complete stop. It will not always do it based on the car's state of charge, as you would expect, but it is nice, and it's nice, again, easy progressive pedal, so you can kind of use it like a rheostat and just use your foot to completely modulate and barely ever touch the actual brake pedal, which love, but it's nicely integrated here. A lot of EVs do it, but how they integrate it and how well they balance it all is kind of hit or miss. So really nice here. It's easy to drive the car with one pedal. That is all totally fine. The other thing, as we again take off from another red light, there are some different sounds you can have the car play through the speakers while you're driving to mimic different engine or propulsion sounds. I think it's kind of silly because to me the appeal of an EV is that it's very quiet. They have one that mimics an engine, which just adds some rumble all the time. It's not really to my taste, but there are a few in here. I've just got it kind of set as it is, which is the more basic electric car sound. Now, we're gonna go ahead and get on the highway here. And like I said, this boost button will give you 10 seconds of extra horsepower. So if I go ahead and hit it right here and then punch it, this is properly quick when you get it going. You noticed I had a little bit of motion there in the steering wheel. It's easy to get the car a little upset through a corner, just as with anything, and then I lifted too much with that one pedal, so of course it wanted to rotate, but easy to correct there, no big deal at all. This is properly fast when you hit the boost button. I did this earlier to try it out, and I more or less did a rolling burnout with the front right tire from 50 miles an hour. It's really astonishing how fast it actually is. And as soon as I get this Nissan Versa out of the way, go ahead and put my signal on, hit it again, and you can hear all my stuff go slamming back to the back hatch. But yeah, it's properly quick. It's very fun. I kind of like the fact that it's got this push to pass, like F1 style button going on. I think it's very silly, but in a cool way. So this is just a neat little touch. But otherwise, even without the boost button, the car is plenty quick all the time. I mean, even if I roll into it, it's, you know, you don't need more power than the 429 it gives you day to day. So there's a lot to like here, but I just don't know if this feels Genesis enough. And every other Genesis I've driven all of them except the G90 sedan, which I've got coming in a few weeks after this video, they all feel more something. They've got a certain character and a certain ethos to them that I find so compelling and so special. And this just doesn't give me that. It's really giving a lot more platform sharing. And I feel awful saying that because I know Genesis will hate hearing that, but this just doesn't, like, this is funky and cool and interesting in a lot of ways, but it doesn't give you what the brand gives you in every other vehicle of theirs. And on top of that, the range is really not sufficient if you're going to be road tripping with it, frankly. 235 miles on a perfect day on 100% charge, that's not cutting it. This is more or less relegated to short distance road trips and around town type driving over anything else. All right, that's it for this review of the 2023 Genesis GV60 Performance. Thank you as always for coming along. Please be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe right here on YouTube. Give us a follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Out Motorsports. If you'd like to join a growing community of LGBT automotive enthusiasts and motorsports competitors, head over to outmotorsports.com. We've got a whole community over there online. We're hosting events in person this year, both on the racetrack and on the street. We would love to have you for any and all of that. Till next time, please stay safe, be well. See you next time.